The other major factor in the Columbian Exchange, so we've examined in the Columbian Exchange, we've examined the importation of new plants, animals, diseases, religion. Another component of the ideas sharing of the Columbian Exchange is related to a new global economic system, really. The Columbian Exchange results in the creation of a global world system. Globalization, historians disagree to some degree on what globalization refers to. Some world historians would say that globalization is simply humans connecting in the world. Other historians would say, and I tend to agree with this group of historians, that globalization is a specific term that refers to the era in human history where there was a truly global world system, a global economic system that was brought into existence. And that periodization would have the Columbian Exchange really as beginning the process of globalization in the 1500s, in the 16th century. In this picture you see up here, this artistic rendering, this is a Spanish galleon. The Spanish galleons were the massive sailing ships of the Spanish Empire. In ways, these are sort of built off the original template of the much smaller Portuguese caravel. As the wooden sailing ships got larger and larger, they grew in the capacity to move people, goods, currency around the world. And while the pace of this interconnection is not as fast as it is in the 21st century, you're nonetheless talking about an interconnection of trade and exchange in the world that is more thorough and more rapid than at any point before. From the Americas, there's a great deal of precious metals, particularly gold and silver. The most abundant of them was silver, particularly from the Spanish territories in places like Peru, the former Inca territory, where mines like the Potosi mine, which is in modern-day Bolivia, produced so much silver that for the first time in history, silver produced as a result of the Columbian Exchange became the first global currency. And in this sense, scholars of world systems theory, scholars of globalization will most likely argue that the process of globalization begins with the Columbian Exchange, particularly in the 1500s. This image here is an advertisement. This is an advertisement that shows African-American slaves growing an American crop, tobacco, on a plantation in Virginia, in the Chesapeake colony. And this is then advertised and being sold in England. This new global economic system was built to a large degree on the exploitation of other humans, on slavery. Humans are actually a very significant part of the Columbian Exchange. Millions of Africans were transported across the Atlantic crossing in the Atlantic system, the trade system, or were born into bondage in the Americas. And they formed really the labor force of many of the new economic products that came out of the Americas. So slavery was inherently linked to this new global economic system. And this advertisement really gives you a picture of what the Atlantic system would look like. African American people who have been brought in bondage as slaves across the Atlantic in the brutal Middle Passage, growing an American crop, tobacco, native to the Americas, in American soil, being overseen and controlled by a farmer of European descent, who then takes the product, ships it to England, sells it for a profit, and then uses the profit to either buy or trade more slaves, and the sort of globalization, this Atlantic system of trade and profit continues. Of course, we know in places like the sugar plantations of Portuguese Brazil or Spanish Cuba, the sugar plantations were incredibly brutal, and the average lifespan of African slaves working on those plantations was in some cases as low as 3 years once they began work on the plantation or the hacienda. And so those plantation systems in the Americas, the sugar plantation systems, required an exponential increase in slavery. And this has massive demographic consequences for Africa. The results of the Columbian Exchange are a transformation in environment, in demographics. You have a massive depopulation of Native Americans as a result of disease and war. You have the arrival of Europeans. Some of those Europeans are from higher levels of society. Many of them come from middling and lower elements of society, coming for land, maybe coming as an indentured servant or something. And then, of course, many of them come in bondage as slaves. And these new people, as the world is interconnected, the Americas are brought into this new world system. We have a fundamental change in the demographics of the world and of the Americas. Changes in society and culture as well. Changes in economics on a global level also, as well as a regional level. The modern world is very much a result of this process. And so the Columbian Exchange really exemplifies just how complex and difficult it is to study and understand history, because the historical narrative is not simply about that which is sort of good or bad, but rather it's complex. The world that you live in today, the United States, for example, the United States is inherently linked to the development of the Columbian Exchange. And in that sense, the United States, for many Americans, not all of them, but for many Americans in the United States, the modern United States is a place that offers a great deal of promise and opportunity, but it's also a place that was built fundamentally on a massive destruction of Native American populations. The Americas are built on a massive slavery bondage system as well. And these types of negative factors have played a fundamental role in shaping what the Americas are today and what the world is today. So history is complex, and this is a very complex history to understand and think about. In fact, it's so powerful and complex that some of the changes are so profound that you might not even know they're right before you. For example, if you lived in Florida, you might naturally associate Florida with oranges. Oranges are not native to the Americas. They were brought by the Spanish. And of course, oranges are also, over the long term, they're not native to Spain either. They came through a long network of exchange in the old world from parts of Asia. Consequences. We think about the consequences because they can inform our understanding of where we're at in the present and how we can learn from the past and make a better future. Some of the consequences for understanding the world as a result of the Columbian Exchange involve understanding the massive population loss. The devastation brought upon Native American people is really immeasurable. And in many cases, it was, if not intentional, at least an unintentional genocide of Native American people's culture. The ramifications of slavery with respect to racism is very much relevant in the 21st century, whether it is from injustice and poverty in the United States or in the shantytown favelas of modern Brazil. We see the historical legacy of racism, which is inherently tied to the slave system. And this is a consequence of the Columbian Exchange. The other one, which is perhaps perceived even less, is the fact that what we see with the economics of the Columbian Exchange is the creation of a global economy, a global world system, in which the economic center, the developed world, the United States, Great Britain, Western Europe, the creation of a global economy in which the economic center profits largely from the toil and work of the less powerful. And that can be developing countries in the 21st century who are basically forced into economic and trade relationships that they have little or no power to deal with. It could deal with the mass colonization that occurs of continents like Africa as the modern world develops during the imperial age. It could obviously refer to the slave system. Regardless of how you look at it, everywhere you look, you usually see that the economic center, which is making profit, in which the populations generally have greater wealth and live in a greater quality of life, are making profit from the resources, the toil, and the work of smaller, less powerful countries.